Good morning. We're learning the Maamar of Lecha Libi, Tafshin Aleph, out of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Gimel the Slichas, and we are on page 10, Ois Beis, and we left off yesterday where the Rebbe explains to us the difference between the various aspects of the spheros, of the emanations of Hashem. And this was all to elaborate on the Nakuda that Nasa Adam B'Tzalmeinu Kidmuseinu, heavenly man is made in the image of Hashem. So by understanding how we function, it helps us understand Hashem better. That's the Nakuda. So let's go back into the text. And we are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, we're about 10 lines from the beginning of where it says, okay, so it's actually about 15 lines where the line begins Besug Hamochin. He says that Chochma, Bina, Da'as are all in the category of Moichin, of intellect. Hine Bechol Zeh, nevertheless, Harikol Svida Usvida Hichaluka Mizulosa B'yetzem Mehusa. Every Svida is different than the other emanation in its very essence and core. V'hainu delays ulbevad shebesfiras hamoichin chalukim besfiras hamakifim u'besfiras hamidos. Not only are the emanations of intellect different than the emanations of makifim, the keser, the crown, the encompassing makifim, and different also than the emotive emanations called sfiras hamidos. One is different than the other within the energies and the vessels within each one. Give me a moment. As the saying goes, three kind of holes, three Shehem Shleisha Chadorim Muyuchodim. This refers to three specific chambers. Bilgugoylus Adam, in man's skull. Shebechol Chola, in each chamber, in each compartment, Nimtza Koyach Meyuchot, there is found a specific Moach Meyuchot. There is found a specific Moach, intellectual element, shemishtane be'inyin chomroi, that is different in what it's comprised of, its material. Mehamoyach hanimtza b'cheder sheni b'shlishi. So Moshe, what are we saying? That the actual brain material that's used for chokhmah is different than the brain material for Bina and the brain material for Das. You know what that would mean scientifically, I don't know. But when you use your seichel in the mode of Chachma, you're accessing another material matter of the brain. So it's not only, what we're learning here is, it's not only that the content is different, but the actual chaymer is different. You understand? You're with me on this? It's very interesting.
Yeah, there we go. said that the right-hand side of the plane is more wet, and the left-hand side of the plane is more dry.
Thank you. Thank you very much for clarifying. Yasher koyach. So this, what you're saying, fits right into what we're learning. Excellent. Continuing. The bezigas koyach hachochma. Oh, you understand? He says it right next line. Look at this. The mezigas koyach hachochma. The meziga means the way it's comprised. The power of chochma, hukar v'alach. It's cold and moist. Umezigas moyach habina, and the way the brain that's associated with bina, hucham v'yavish. It's dry and warm. V'chein mishtanim b'hasichlim sholehem. And the Rebbe says, so there are differences in the brain depending on the seichel the particular idea that you are processing. Isn't that interesting? Using all of this as an analogy, top of page 11. So it's all true in the same manner in the heavenly emanations. Although this is a rhetorical remark, we know a rule that the emanations are like a chain, one coming from the other. Moshe, the end of the upper loop is the head of the lower loop. So there's an association between the two. His retort is, Mikol Mokai, nevertheless, Hein Chalukai Zumizu. They are yet different one than the other. V'Chaluka is Gam Ba'ifin Hishtal Shalusam. And the way one comes from the other is also different. Liyois the Chol Svira Svira Himiyuchadis B'Mina. Why? Because you have to begin with this Nekudah, which is we're talking about different spheros. So the fact that one is mishtalsha from the other does not detract an iota from the fact that you're talking about this is chokhmah, this is bina, and this is chesed and gevura. So as much as you're going to say that there is an association between the spheros as they progress one from the other, that's true only after the fact that we accept and understand that the essence of each sphera is very different than the other one. In other words, don't make a mistake thinking that the emotive elements, the emotive emanations, are like seichel emanations. No, completely not. However, is there a process and progress for the development of the emotions? Sure. The healthier your mind is in an organized way, chokhmah, then bina, and then das, then your chesed, then your gevura, and your teferes are healthier. What if you skip a step and you go right to bina and you don't access chokhmah and you don't access das? Then your midah will be a lopsided midah. You'll have a midah, you'll have an emotion, but the emotion will be not exactly refined. And that is why we see people have emotions, and many times the emotions are out of whack. The emotions are, going in different directions, and to the point where they become unhealthy. And you ask, what happened? What happened is that it didn't go through the process which it needs to go through for it to be regulated. Now, there are other times when one wants to experience a transcendental experience, a selfless experience, an out-of-body experience. Maybe then having an emotion directly from the nefesh, from the soul, not going through the process, the Chabad system first, has its benefit, and that this is also discussed in Chassidus. Going from the emotion directly to the soul, but that's kind of the exception. The average and most beneficial way is it goes through a system. The child is a child, and the Rambam says it. You teach a child, you give them candies and toys, and the child gets older and says, "I don't want any candies anymore." So you say, "You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to give you, I'm going to bribe you a little bit with things that are more sophisticated." And then after a while becomes a teenager, and those things don't talk to him or her. Yes, Hillel.
So what you were just saying about directly from the emotion, is that sort of a different understanding of the difference between the Chabad and the Chagat pathways in Hasidus?
Well, yes and no. I would say yes and no. Now, what do I mean? Does everyone understand Hillel's question? Hillel is saying, based on what I said before, the difference between the midos coming as following Chabad, the intellect, versus the midos going directly to the nefesh. So he's asking me, would that be the difference between the Chabad style of Hasidus and the Chagas style of Hasidus? And I said yes and no. And why did I say yes and no? Because it isn't usually the case that the emotions that Chagas Hasidus employs, it isn't, I don't want to say usually, but it's not the average Chassid's soul experience. That's not soul. Soul, Hillel, dancing and shouting and clapping and thinking doesn't yet mean soul, nefesh. Nefesh is a very different experience which can express itself either through Chabad or through Chagas. But if you're asking me, this is why I said yes and no, if you're thinking that when you see a Breslover, clapping and getting all ecstatic with that clapping, and you say that's coming from his nefesh, I say not necessarily. It could. I'm not going to rule it out, but I'm not yet convinced. Why? Because that Breslover learned Likutei Moharan, or he heard from one of his teachers, that the way you access Avodas Hashem is through this particular emotional experience. So there too, Hillel, he's doing that because he has a certain idea that he learned and was taught. So that's not nefesh, that's intellect.
Mm-hmm.
Nefesh...
where I was coming from... Okay.
1 second.
Where I was coming from in asking the question, I was thinking about what Yonatan said about the liquidity in the brain, and what Maamar said, and then I was thinking that on PET scans, things that show electrical activity in the brain, it's not that when certain kinds of processes go on, it's not that the whole brain is not being used, it's that some areas get a more concentrated dose of energy. So what I was thinking about was that there's a pathway through Chabad, an intellectual pathway that lights up the brain in a certain way, and there's a pathway through Chabad, through Chagat, that lights up the brain in a certain way.
That's true.
What I was thinking.
Yes. So that I would say yes. I thought you were asking me about Chagas coming directly from nefesh. And what I was saying is that nefesh is a very different experience. Nefesh is a spontaneous experience, and that spontaneity can express itself through Chabad and through Chagas. So in Hasidus Yonasin, there is brought. It's called Midas de Gadlus and midos the katnus. You understand? You remember those terms? And what does it mean? Midos the katnus, miniature, Moshe, miniature, small midos, means the midos as they are a result of seichel. Midos the gadlus are the midos the way they come directly from nefesh. This needs more conversation, and maybe another time. Let us continue. But Moshe, so far, is it clear what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Let's go further. Pay. The Chol hu hahefish porati shebasfiris. And the Rebbe says these differences are the overall, the specific, not the general difference between the spheres, but the specific difference between them. The Rebbe says, now there's another additional general difference in the spheres, as they are in each realm. You know, we talk about the four worlds, Atzilus, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya. What's the acronym for them? Abaya. A, Atzilus. Ba, Bria. Ya, Yud, Yetzira. Ya, Ayin, the Ayin of Abaya is Asiya. Abaya. Each one has a subset of 10 spheres known as the emanations that are a part of that realm. So the realm sets the agenda. In other words, let's say it a little more simple. Here we have Yonason, Moshe, myself, and Hillel. Each one of us are different. Now we all have 10 spheres, but Yonason's 10 spheres is based on Yonason, and mine is based on me, and yours, Moshe, on you, and Hillel, yours on. You can't say we all. But what do you mean? It's intellect and it's emotions. Of course, it's intellect and emotions. But who are you? And depending on who you are, that's the way your intellect and emotions are. It's exactly what he's saying here. So the 10 spheres of Olam Habriya are very different than the 10 spheres of Olam HaYetzira. It's a very different direction. So we have, again, what's the different direction? Whatever Atzilus, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya are. Whatever each one is, then the emanations, the tools and instruments manifest what the agenda is. So you can't compare agendas, because each world, just like each person, has another agenda. Okay? One person is participating in the shir because they want to understand deep Hasidus. Another person wants to get a bottom line result from the Maamar. A third person is looking for emotional support. Right? Now, it's not that you can't have two things. You can have two things at the same time. But the fact is that there are differences. Welcome back, Yoni. Okay. So now he says, Yoni on page 11, line 4 or 5. You can't compare the 10 spheres of the world of formation to the world of creation. And so too, you can't compare at all the 10 spheres of the world of creation, to the 10 spheres of Atzilus. Look what he says, Moshe. The names in each world, in each realm, are the same. Chabad, Hagas, Nehim, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Ned. In every world, they're the same names. And their idea of they being intellect, emotive, and practical are the same three trends. Mikol Makim. Look further. Nevertheless, Hareim chalukim be'etzem usam, they're very different in their core essence, because the agenda is not set by them, the agenda is set by the world they're in. We set our agenda of emotions and intellect and practicality, depending on each one of who we are. So the fact that we are all now studying a Maamar and trying to understand it with our seichel, nevertheless, it's Yoni's seichel, my seichel, Yonason, Moshe, Hilla, everyone has their seichel. So everyone is going to understand it based on who they are, although we're all using seichel. So we are using all together, every one of us is using our intellectual tool to understand the content, but nevertheless we process it differently because we are different. Let's continue inside. The whole Yuvin. So this clarifies to us the way these emanations express themselves in our neshama, in our soul. Our soul powers are divided into two categories. One called makifim, the encompassing peripheral kolchos, and number two, upnimiyim, the inner kolchos. And within these two categories, you have makifim, moichin, and midas. Keser, the crown, which we spoke about yesterday. Moichin, the intellect, or midas, and the emotions. Now look what he says here. The einig v'rotzen, pleasure, and will, the willpower. Hem koiches makifim. They are what we call peripheral kolchos. She'ein lahem evorim miyuchodim. They don't have a specific aver, a limb, a place where you could say this is their abode. When you have pleasure, pleasure is not limited to the brain. Pleasure is any part of your body can have pleasure, and so too willpower. Yes, it's recognized in the brain. You hear that? Because the brain is the seat of intelligence and thought and idea. But where is the pleasure felt? It can be felt in your feet when you put it into a hot mikveh or a hot tub. And you say, geschmack. So the recognition of it being geschmack is in the brain. But that's not the seat of the pleasure. And the same is true with willpower. That's what he says. And the difference is expressed because of the particular place in which the pleasure and the willpower is revealed. But from the perspective of the soul, the einig v'rotzen, associated with pleasure and will, they're equal throughout. I desire to swim. I desire to draw. I desire to climb. And I get pleasure from that. So there's no one place where you could say pleasure, this is the seat of pleasure. Let's continue. Or the person says, I don't want this, or I don't have pleasure from it. This is all what we call koiches makifim. Now we go to what's called koiches pnimiyim, the inner koiches. They invest themselves in specific places. Where is the seat, the brain? In the head, not in your toes and not in your heart. Where is the seat of emotions? It's in the heart. Have you ever heard of someone trying to feel with intellect? Yeah, and it's a problem. feeling at the end of the day is with the heart. To appreciate feeling, we use intellect. Like in a shidduch, right? They call it chemistry, right? What's the pshat? The pshat is hamshachas alev. There should be some attraction between the male and the female. That's not in the head, and if it's in the head, it's not great. Now, I'm not saying the other end. You have to have heart palpitations when you meet you go on a shidduch date, and even when you're engaged. It doesn't say that in the Torah. If it happens, it happens. There needs to be a fine balance between the two. But what if a person, and people wrote to the Rebbe, you should know, they don't have feelings, and the Rebbe many times told them, continue meeting. And then after a while, if you still don't have the feelings, then it's not for each other. You're not for each other. Because feelings are, one second, Yoni, feelings need to be in the heart. Again, I'm not saying heart palpitations, but some feeling. I'll tell you a personal story to clarify. When I met my wife, so it was a very nice time, but I wrote to the Rebbe, I said, I have very, very good friends, and I don't feel any real difference between sitting with my wife, this girl, and my friends. This was in the beginning. And the Rebbe told me, he answered me, continue meeting. So I understood right away, he's telling me this is your shidduch and zivuk, and cut it out, But even if you don't believe that, continue meeting, and you will develop and see that sitting with a woman for a date, for a shidduch, is different than sitting with your best male friend. And indeed it was that way. But it took another time and another time. Yes, Yoini.
Rabbi, my question is about this, the point that the Rayatz is talking about here, about stimulation that is supposed to be coming from the heart, and the attraction from the heart, not necessarily from the intellect. Is that maybe, I don't know if it's only a Hasidus thing, but is that the reason why there's a big problem today, let's say in the yeshiva world, where the concepts, the Torah concepts, are being learned intellectually, where someone goes to Panovich or goes to Mir, and he's learning all day, 14 hours a day. I'm not talking about a guy who goes and smokes, like outside. So the guys are really 13, 14 hours, but there's no opportunity to use the heart. I mean, to use the heart would be miftzoim, doing mitzvahs, going to a hospital. So the things that are being taught, it's very nice, the intellect, but it's not penetrating to the heart because it's without meisim. You need to do the meisim for implementation.
Right, but Yoni, there's three things: intellect, emotions, and meisim. I think you're really putting the focus on meisim, and that's another discussion. Okay? But that's not what we're discussing here. Right now, we're not yet. We're talking here about intellect versus emotions. Now, the truth is, and I've been writing a lot about this, the Musar movement was exactly what you're identifying. They hoped that would be the complementary tool to express emotions in the Litvische, Gemara-oriented world. But as I forget who wrote, and I quoted it in my book on the Rabbi Soloveitchik and the Rebbe, he wrote this, I think, in the 20s or 30s, he said, we have lost to the Hasidim. And this is the 20s and 30s. It didn't work. It did not work. And I could tell you it didn't work. What do I mean? You could count on your fingers the amount of yeshivas and students within the yeshivas who study Musar seriously. I'm not saying there aren't any. There are. But if you take 10,000 students, if you show me maybe, 500, 300, I'll be very surprised. So there is something to that. The Musar is mamish completely out of the real realm of serious study. Some yeshivas, they have a 15-minute Musar Seder, and either you excuse the expression we used to say in yeshiva. Yoni will appreciate the saying, and Yonason, you'll probably also remember it. You shove the bull. You bull shove. That's what we used to call it. It was a nice way of saying you just waste your time with idle chatter. And those that don't do that, but some are learning this and some are learning that, there isn't a cohesiveness and an organized way. Now let's talk about Chassidus. Chassidus too has not yet permeated the world of Chassidish yeshivas. And this, you should know, was a pet peeve of the Rebbe. The Rebbe, when he met with any other, with other Rebbes and other, tzaddikim and rabbanim, the number one thing, I just wrote about this yesterday, the number one thing that he wanted for them is to implement in their yeshiva serious study of Chassidus. And they wouldn't do it. They would not do it. And they argued because it wasn't their Masorah. Okay, I understand. It wasn't their Masorah. But that itself needs to be looked at. Even if it's not your Masorah, but we're living at a time where people, the Rebbe would say, are reading magazines and newspapers. That's what the Rebbe said 50, 60 years ago. You imagine what he would say today, what they're looking at, right? So you're telling me it's not that? This I heard from the Rebbe. You're telling me it's not the Masorah? You're out of your mind. The Masorah is not to read newspapers, and they're reading newspapers. So get with it. Make up your mind. So there's a breakdown in in the learning of Chassidus too. But it's true what you identified, that there needs to be a place for expression of emotions, and it's a very good point you made. And I want to tell you, learning, in yeshiva, in Chabad yeshivas, in Morristown, in particular, we had a chance to invest in this type of activity that you're describing. To take the intellectual learning, which we learned, Chassidus, deep Chassidus. Yonason could tell you, Samach Vav, my Maamar, the Rebbe Rashab, and ideas to think about and made you really think like a hard piece of Gemara with Rashi and Taisus, and then daven. Then to daven. And davening meant thinking, like we learned the other day, Hasaga Toiva Ba'avonos Elikus, to comprehend very well godly ideas. And that you did in your davening with the purpose that when you say Ashra Yoshev Isecha, you should really believe and mean what you're saying. Fortunate is man who sits in the home of Hashem. So it's not just lip service, but you're mamish, Ashrei. You feel lucky. You know what I'm saying? So it takes a mindset. What you were identifying is true. When you give students an opportunity to do chesed, it's a whole different experience. Mind you, I want to let you know that in some of the Hesder yeshivas, in Shalavim, for example, that they, on Hanukkah, they go on what we would call mivtzoyim. And they're not the only ones. So I don't think it's fair to say, that Lubavitch is the only ones. There are other yeshivas, maybe more in the Hesder line of yeshivas, which are reaching out. But absolutely, the Maisa is very important. But, to change an old horse is very difficult. When you're steeped in a certain way, it's so hard to break the pattern. It's like the age-old argument. You're using an art scroll Gemara in the yeshiva base medrash? Shame on you! What do you mean shame on you? I don't understand otherwise. And I want to learn.
Rabbi, my brother-in-law found in a dumpster in Shari Tzedek, in Shari Chesed, where you stayed, in a dumpster there, the entire Adin Steinzach Shas. In a dumpster. Okay, but that's because of politics. I have it now.
Oh, good for you. No, but Yoni, that's what this happened recently or years ago.
10 years ago.
Right, that's when there was a controversy. But that's because I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like It's a busha. You should, I was looking at the shidduch, and I asked about this fellow that, he learns, he knows how to learn, and I was told by his friend, he learns a lot, and he knows how to learn. But he learns from an English Gemara, from an art scroll for whatever, Steinsaltz, whatever, because he wants to understand. And he's accomplished in learning. Now, I understand there's something to a traditional Gemara. I'm from that generation. I can appreciate it. But I've come to understand that the world we're in today, we need that as a tool, and it's a very good tool. So whether it's Tanya from Lessons in Tanya, or, someone said, well, why don't you sit with a chavrusa and learn the Tanya? Or let's say Hillel was learning with his chavrusa with Baruch, Shiurim, from the Heichel Menachem Tanya, Chassidus Muva Eres. Oi! What are you, out of your mind? Chassidus Muva Eres is so rich and so wonderful to explain what's otherwise not understood by most people. And it's not not a compromise. Because I know what Chassidus Muveris is. I sit with the editor every Shabbos in Shul, and I know his quality and his staff, and I know what they're putting into it. But they're making it.
I would say Dafka that I've been through the Tanya 3 or 4 times, and the depth that the Chassidus Muveris brought out showed me that I was missing 60, 70, 80% of it.
100%.
So, because it's so dense. Every word is so deeply chosen and
right.
I also just on another thing, I was just it stayed in my mind. I researched. I just did a little Google search, and I wanted to tell you all something fascinating about the moistness in the chesed and the right side of the hemisphere. Apparently, one of the very early researchers in the anatomy of the brain, whose name was Broca, he found the right hemisphere to be heavier by 2 grams in a male, in a male person, but less heavy in a female, which has implications for Chachma and Bina, it seems, and that it is Dafka, heavier than the left side. So it seems like that which the Mekubalim have said and what neuroscience is catching up to are similar. L'chora, it would seem like that probably the difference is due to liquid, is due to moistness, like Yonatan said.
So again, the difference between male and female, please repeat that again, is what?
So the right hemisphere is heavier than the left hemisphere, more in males than in females.
And the right is and the right is associated with what? With?
Well, the right is associated with Chochmah and the left with Bina, right?
Right, correct.
But the right side then also is associated with Chesed.
Correct.
And the male side being Chesed. So it seems like there are implications at that level for a lot of what we discussed.
Very interesting. Yeah, it's a fascinating type of a study, Hillel, maybe you're the one to finally put it out. Put it out. Begin with a paper, and then develop it into a book. I think I'm very serious. I mean, Avram Twersky, God bless him. If his mind is working and you could talk to him, he would be a person to talk to about these ideas. Does he still come to Bet Shemesh? Does he still come? Does Rabbi?
I don't know. I haven't seen. I saw him at one point in the spring, or maybe it might be before the Corona separation. So I don't know. What's happening now.
Okay, Chevra. Amen. It should be exactly. Have a great Shabbos, everyone. We'll see everyone Sunday morning. Zay Gazon. Take care. Good Shabbos. Bye bye.